Hi! Boom, there I am. Oh my goodness. How are you? We're not at war. Technically. Yet. Ish. Oh goodness, what a time to be alive. But hey, we're here, and I'm so grateful that you are as well. Welcome to this edition of At the Mic, the Thursday Deep Dive for this June 19th, 2025. I'm your host, Keith Malinak, and today, we need to talk about the Cold War. Got a lot to discuss with my guest today. I'm looking so much forward to this conversation. Matilda is not messing with my feet this week, which I'm grateful for, so that's a plus. She's around here somewhere, however. Let me remind you to please go and like, subscribe, and share at all the places where you can find the At the Mic show, both the Thursday and Friday editions that we do. We're on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify. Wes has got us everywhere. Whatever platform you like, Wes has made sure to put the show there. I'm so grateful for Hero Wes. That's atthemicshow.com. Please bookmark that. All the links that you need are there. And like I said, we hang out here every Thursday and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. We have a little fun, watch some animal videos, drink more than we should on Fridays at 3, on Thursdays at 3. We, of course, analyze a topic. And my goodness, do we have one for you? And I am learning on the fly, y'all. Gabby, by the way, does a great job over at Instagram. Go and see what she's up to over there. She created that page for At the Mic Show, and she keeps it active. She keeps it hopping. At the Mic Show. Thank you, Gabby, for all your hard work over there. Okay, so did we actually win the Cold War? And I think that's a fair question, especially in what we see that's happened in the last generation since we won it with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union. Our government, through the CIA and its various programs and operations around the world and at home, they need a closer examination. And I think it's a fair, in fact, that's the first question I'm going to ask my guest. I'm going to bring her in right now. And I just did meet her, Colonel Roxanne Towner Watkins. And hello, Colonel, how are you?
Great. How are you?
All right. So she's joining us from the road. And let me explain how I just saw a tweet from you. I saw a tweet from you just a couple of weeks ago. And you had mentioned Operation Gladio. And the way you described it, I thought, oh my gosh, that's right up my alley. I'd never heard of it. I'll be 50 years old next year. And shame on me. I have never heard the phrase Operation Gladio. So I started doing a little digging on my own, and I saw enough to go, okay, let me go back to the Colonel here and say, hey, what's this all about here? And so we had a brief phone call, and I just stopped her. I was like, okay, no, this is a show. This is definitely a show. So thank you for making time. I apologize for not knowing of your work on this subject. You're very prolific. You have a Rumble channel, Colonel's Corner, I believe it is.
Correct.
And you cover a lot of this stuff, and I appreciate you making time today. And here was the question that I brought you up here, and I was going to say, hey, is it a fair question or a fair statement to say that our government, that people like me naively thought for decades of my life, I have begun to question it quite a bit since 9/11. We've gone over that on this show. But is it a fair statement to say that our government has done more harm than good in the world? I know that's a right out of the gate question here. And if you want to get to that later, go for it. But I just wanted to at least set the table with that question.
So I think that after this show, that's the question everybody needs to decide for themselves.
Okay.
Because my assessment after researching this, and you think you've never heard of it. You've never been in the military. You've never served inside of the U.S. government. I was inside the government, 4 years at the Pentagon, U.S. Central Command on 9/11. I've deployed to Iraq. I've been all over the world, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. I'd never heard of it until 2.5 years ago.
Wow. Okay. And just to set a little background, in case people aren't familiar, Air Force Colonel.
Yes.
And do you want to kind of explain kind of your background and how you came to learn what Operation Gladio is all about?
Sure. So I spent 30 years on active duty in the Air Force. Like I said, I've lived all over. I have 6 different degrees, so I'm not ignorant. But what I realized in doing my own research, and I've read probably over 600 books, nonfiction, and that's a requirement to when you're in the military. I was selected to go to Air War College, which is a 1-year master's degree at Air War College. And you study basically the world. You look at it from a geopolitical, economic kind of, because all wars are fought over resources, basically. And so I think I'm fairly literate in our history. And one of the books a couple of years ago that I was reading was Anthony Sutton's book. He wrote 3 of them. It's referred to as his trilogy. And it basically explains to you that a small group of people in New York City, primarily located at 120 West Broadway, convenient that they're all in the same building.
I was gonna say, you're gonna make me Google 120 West Broadway, or
So,
is that gonna be a spoiler?
you're definitely going to want to take notes.
Okay.
So that group of people and a group of people inside the city of London funded the Bolshevik Revolution. As a matter of fact, Trotsky was housed by the people at 120 Broadway in the United States just prior to him being ferried over to Russia to plant the Bolshevik flag in Russia after the war there, the revolution. So they also funded, Lenin hung out in London, and they ferried him through Germany into Russia. They met. We know what happened with the Bolshevik Revolution. They also funded, his second book was let's see, he talked about FDR. Okay. So the same people in these locations basically funded the rise and the creation of FDR. They also funded Hitler's rise to power. Now, again, having read a whole bunch of history,
So
I was knocked off my feet.
I bet, because a lot of us think, hey, when they did the Build Back Better, and there was obviously some massive coordination through the WEF, and even you can go back to the United Nations. No, you can go way back, huh?
Yes.
on world coordination of leaders.
So one of the morals of this story is these people create both the proverbial left and the proverbial right to keep us at odds with each other. And anyone that knows anything about government understands that totalitarian governments are all on one end of a spectrum, and anarchy, no government, is on the other end of the spectrum. So how we ever allowed them to brainwash us into Nazism, which is basically a dictator that had all of the oligarchs in Germany colluding with the government, which is more of a totalitarian form of government, was ever on the right side of a spectrum, is just ridiculous. So that was kind of my first, I'm like, wow. And then you do research, and I never advocate people reading books if you don't research the author. And so I started looking into Anthony Sutton and found out he wrote quite a bit while he was at the Hoover Institute, which is kind of questionable. But they would not allow him to publish this work. He literally had to quit to publish this work.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, he's legit. So he mentioned this dichotomy between the right and the left. And I was watching several of his videos, and he mentioned a thing called the third way. And his premise is that they create a and I'm going to use their words, far left and a far right, so they can herd you into the middle. So there will be terrorism on the far left and there will be terrorism on the far right, so they can manipulate you psychologically into the path that they want you to take. So I started researching that phrase, the third way, and you'll find several books that were written about it. And basically, they go back and they talk about post-World War II. There was a document that was written called the Madrid Circular, and it basically outlines this whole philosophy of this psychological operation to push people in the direction that they want. So I'm like basically 6 months into this research, and my husband, who is so supportive of me, comes in one day when I'm in the middle of a bunch of research, and he goes, "Hey, do you remember that comedy we used to watch called Get Smart?" And I'm looking at him and I'm going, "Yeah, but I'm kind of busy." And he says, "Well, just hear me out." Huh. Said, "Do you remember what the organizations were called?" And no, I don't remember, because I've got all of this other stuff in my head. And he goes, "They were called Chaos and Control." And I looked at him and I went, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I had been researching. They create chaos via terrorist acts in order to control us. And the name of the show was Get Smart. That was for us. We're the ones that are supposed to get smart and catch on to the fact that we're being manipulated. So he always comes in with those zingers. I'm like, okay, so now I know I'm on the right track. So, excuse me. I continue reading, and I find in the book called The Third Way, I think it's by Joseph Farrell, a term that I'd never come across in my military experience called stay behind units.
Stay behind units. I just want to point out, this is a great point by Daguerre. Chaos and Control. Revelation of the method. They always need to tell you what they're doing. Isn't that something? They always love to just slip that in there and right out in the open. But anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
Sure. So I started searching around. I found The Third Way, and then I found this phrase called stay behind units. And again, I have a degree in this stuff. Mm-hmm. I'd never heard that. And so I started researching stay behind units, and I come across Operation Gladio. And so I start Googling that phrase, not literally Google, don't ever use Google, but.
Okay. So if somebody wants to do their own research, what browser would you recommend?
Yandex. It's the only place you will find any of this information.
Okay.
Period. I can take phrases in people's names, and I will get like 3 hits on Brave. People like to use that, or DuckDuckGo. If you go to Yandex, you'll find 25 for every 3 that you find anywhere else.
Wow. I wonder, there's a search engine that I haven't used much. I've kind of forgotten about it, but I would be curious to know if it is along the lines of Yandex. It's called Luxxle, LUXXLE.com, and it lets you filter, maybe you want right-leaning sources, maybe you want left-leaning sources, maybe we're down in the middle. I wonder how it is on some of this deep dive stuff, Luxxle.com. But anyway, continue.
All right. So I start looking up Operation Gladio, and I immediately come across Paul Williams' book. Now, I've read Paul Williams' book. I've interviewed him twice. I have his personal phone number. He's kind of been like my guru, if you will. Okay. And I've read his book 3 times. And every time I read it, I find some new interesting thing. And I've also had to go back and reread many of the books that I already had on particular people. And what you will find is lots of references to it, but not calling it Operation Gladio. They will talk about anti-communist cells, or they will talk about all of this other way. They talk about counter insurgent forces, and they have lots of fluffy names for basically what Operation Gladio is. And once you understand what it is, when you start reading things, I have an entire slew of people now on X that read, and they will send me all kinds of excerpts out of books and stuff like that that all talk about it without naming it. And that's kind of the controversy that when you first contacted me, I was in the middle of, because I push people to actually call it what it is, and they will not. Because once you give people the tools to do their own research, everybody is going to know about this. And that's why I'm very particular about giving people the actual name. So we have to first start with a couple of words that I'm going to use throughout this presentation. Some of the terminology that I tend to use is Operation Gladio is a generic term that refers to this program under NATO where they fielded post-World War II stay-behind units. And I'll go through the history of that in a minute. But the Operation Gladio is a generic term. It was specifically the name of Italy's program. And Italy is the only country that has ever done an actual deep investigation and exposed their Operation Gladio program. So because of that, basically the entire network has been referred to as Operation Gladio, but specifically it technically is the name of Italy's program. Okay. Also, it morphed over time into moving out of NATO specifically into other geographical regions. And the name of the operation that was conducted that is a mirror image of Operation Gladio in NATO is Operation Condor in Latin America. They are the same people set up by the same Nazis. And we'll get to that. Okay. So the other critical term in our conversation is the International Syndicate. So when I first started doing this, I was over on True Social, and we basically set up a book club and started doing long series of posts of my reading. And so every day, whatever I read, I summarized in a post. And immediately I was attacked by both sides. I was called an anti-Semite. I was called a person that made excuses for other. So I've been hit by everybody, and everybody was like, oh, it's all the Jesuits. Oh, it's all the Jewish people. Oh, it's all this. So in order to overcome that and actually get on with the conversation and not be combative with everybody, the term that me and a couple of my researchers came up with was the International Syndicate, because it's all races, it's all religions, as you're going to find out throughout this presentation. And it is a syndicate. It's a criminal syndicate that operates, that are basically overthrowing governments to control their resources. And I'll explain that in a little bit more depth. But I refer to it as an international syndicate. And the difference between my research and anyone else that talks about this, number one, they will not use the words Operation Gladio. And number two, they never talk about the people that are in the syndicate. We have done deep dives into every person that I come across in the syndicate, and I name names.
And when you refer to the syndicate, are you talking about you're naming names of people that go way back, or is this continuing?
It continues to.
Okay. And by the way, I need to say this. I'm so grateful for your time today, obviously, but also because you do a live stream that everyone needs to know about at 4 p.m. Eastern every day, correct?
Correct.
Right here on X?
Yes.
Okay. So
it's simulcast onto my Rumble channel as well.
On Rumble and X. And I just wanted to, A, make sure that everybody knows that, and B, I'm grateful for you giving us the time today. So hopefully your audience will find you over here. I don't want them angry at you in about 40 minutes. So maybe retweet this. They know. Okay, good. Because I was looking at the clock and I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to be looking for
No, they'll be in the audience.
Okay, cool. Making sure. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So every opportunity I get to contact a new audience, they're all for it, because we want it to obviously cut across everyone. Okay.
So Are there names that in the International Syndicate that we would recognize, or are these shadowy figures?
Not.
Okay.
Probably not. And that's part of what I pride myself on, is naming names. Because if you know their names, like the George Soros, those are the shiny objects out here.
Right.
The people behind this, a lot of them were Warhamster Brady, who is what he refers to as a reform Wall Street banker. And I do a show every Thursday at noon. And we started with it's about secret societies. And we started with Skull and Bones. And what you find, if you go back to the beginning of that series, is a lot of the people that graduated through the Skull and Bones system at Yale are the people behind the scenes that no one's ever heard of. Now, you may recognize a name or two, like the Delanos and the Roosevelts and the Bushes, but generally speaking, the people that are part of that go unrecognized generally. But
yeah, they I guess they love the power more than the fame. I mean, when they revealed the 4 people that were running the Biden administration, this is a smaller scale, I didn't recognize any of them. I don't know if that was just because I'm clueless. Well, that might be part of it. But I was just like, wow, that's a cabal that I didn't know about.
Let me just throw out a name that I can guarantee you. You said you were from Charleston, or that you spent time in Charleston, South Carolina. Have you ever heard of the name William Pauley?
I don't think so, no.
Have you ever heard of Pauley Island?
I've heard of islands. I don't think I've even heard of that one.
Okay, that's named after his family, by the way.
What'd you say?
That's named after his family.
Okay.
So William Pauley is from South Carolina, and he is he spent a lot of time as a U.S. ambassador. And what you're going to find as you research Operation Gladio is there's a lot of patterns. So there's no difference between the OSS, the State Department, and the CIA. They kind of operate as, a continuity of people just moving around. As a matter of fact, the CIA, if they get an officer that needs to be hidden for a little bit, they'll stick him over in the State Department or some of their front companies in order to take the heat off of him. And then eventually he comes back into the fold. But William Pauley is one of those people that had a dotted line to the CIA. You will never find him on the payroll of the CIA, but he operated as an asset of the CIA for many, many years. And you will find him in the drug trafficking operation out of Southeast Asia. You're going to find him as the ambassador when we couped Peru, when we couped Brazil. You're going to find him. He was one of the original funders of the Flying Tigers that Major General Claire Chennault used to set up the drug operations post-World War II in the Southeast Theater. You will also find him using his yacht to carry a whole bunch of Cuban exiles down to launch an attack on Cuba. You find him all over. He owned the airlines prior to the overthrow of Batista. He owned the airline flying to Cuba. He owned all of the bus transportation in Cuba, and he owned a whole bunch of sugar plantations in Cuba. And why is that important? Because the CIA and their drug trafficking used Cuba as the entrance into the United States of the heroin coming out of Southeast Asia. And do you know what they cut the heroin with? Sugar. They had every part of this network under the control of these people. And so, again, he pops up all the time. He also was on the committee that Truman had in order deciding what the eventual CIA was going to look like. His name pops up in so many places. And now that I know his name, I know to be on the lookout for him. Because wherever he's at, something bad's going to happen. Now, obviously, he's dead. And weirdly enough, he died in a very weird way. Of course, we are told that he committed suicide because he had an illness. He did not commit suicide. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. So, anyway, another one we just went over, CV Star. Nobody's ever heard of him. So Cornelius Vander Starr, Starr, he was part of the drug operations in China. He set up an insurance company in China, which was basically a CIA front. Do you know what we call that company today?
Oh, no. What?
AIG.
Okay.
So, and what happened in the 2008 meltdown? AIG.
Yes.
That's why understanding Operation Gladio and actually naming names in the syndicate is so important, because a lot of their legacies are what we're dealing with today.
Right.
That's the fear, and that's why no one names names. So, anyway, that's just some examples of this network that we're going to talk about.
No, I mean, this is, I'm already fascinated, and I can't wait to see where this goes. It's rare that I sit down and start a conversation with a complete blank slate. And so all of this is new to me. And I just have how did you end up going down this road? Because, the information age.
Pissed.
Say that again?
I was pissed.
You were just pissed, yeah.
I spent taxpayer dollars for 6 different degrees, and I didn't learn a flipping relevant thing about our history. And I was required to take history. And the worst thing you can do is tick me off. I'll just say that. So I'm like a dog with a bone. Once I get aggravated, I spent a good portion of my adult life in college classes. And when I found out that I went to Air War College, and oh, by the way, on this trip, I just left Air War College because it was a personal mission of mine to go back there. They have this huge taxpayer-funded library on the campus of Maxwell Air Force Base that facilitates all professional military education in the Air Force. If you go in residence professional military education, you go to Maxwell Air Force Base. Do you know there's not a single book in that entire library that talks anything about Operation Gladio? Man. Not a single book, because I'm good friends with a retired 3-star general who was the Air University commander of Maxwell Air Force Base, and for the Air Force. And I told him that I was working that into my trip out to Texas in order to kind of reassure myself that I am a good researcher and I didn't just overlook it. Not a single book in the entire library. And it is a ginormous library.
I mean, this is the thing about the information age, and obviously the internet being a part of our lives for the last 30 years or so, is that we are beginning to open our eyes and share this information with one another that's been out there, but just not accessible. And it's almost like, is this a good phrase for this discussion and so many others? Everything we know is wrong. It just, it feels like everything, not just, oh, that's interesting, or, oh, I didn't know that. Holy crap, it's everything. And from your perspective, I'm pissed as an American. For someone like you,
correct,
that has given their lives to the service of this country. I can't imagine being in your position and covering all of this stuff.
No. So there were some days where I just had to put it down and walk away, because I've lost personal friends, and it is something that it's crazy. So I want to explain another big picture concept before we get into too much details. So I'm a very visual person. And when I first started doing this research, I kind of characterized it as 2 different things. One was that pieces of information, I know pieces of information, but none of those pieces of information made any sense to us. You may have woke up on 9/11, someone else woke up that may have been in Vietnam, and no one could put all of the pieces together. So to me, what Operation Gladio does is it's the skeleton that allows you to put the pieces so that you begin to see the entire body. Mm-hmm. And also, one other concept is Operation Gladio basically functions as a wheel. That wheel has 3 spokes: drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and human trafficking. Human trafficking happens as a result of the drug trafficking and weapons trafficking, because weapon trafficking creates wars. You have to have wars to weapon traffic because they skim weapons off of shipments and everything else. That war generates human refugees that become trafficking victims. And so if you look around the entire wheel, you have those 3 elements in every one of these scenarios that we're going to talk about.
Wow.
And because it's a wheel, you are required to grease the hub of the wheel to keep it rolling down the road. That grease is blackmail. So all of these people that spend their lives talking about Jeffrey Epstein don't realize they're talking about one piece of this entire apparatus, because the only way this apparatus has been allowed to operate undercover, covertly for as long as it has, is because no one understands the entire picture. And it requires blackmail to keep people shut up. So that's just kind of some big overviews. I also want to talk about, just real quick, because it's going to be relevant in everything we talk about, is if you go back and pull up a map of the world in 1930, you're going to see all of these different countries. And many of these countries looked very differently in 1930, because World War II, in my opinion, was fought primarily in order to rearrange the global landscape. And the countries, because there's another concept that's involved in this called the strategy of tension. The way that they create the chaos is it's like the boiling water where you kill the frog by slowly turning up the heat. Mm-hmm. That's called the strategy of tension. That's actually a term that they used for back into the early 1900s. Wow. So strategy of tension requires you to have an actual tension point. So if you go back and you look, weirdly enough, at what I call fake countries, some people may be affronted by that term, but if you look at the post-World War II new countries, Israel, Pakistan, Taiwan, just to name a few, when they redrew the map post-Ottoman Empire and post-World War II, they took a huge country called Kurdistan and broke it up into 4 parts. It now makes up part of Turkey, part of Syria, part of Iraq, and part of Iran. Well, why is that important? Because every single one of those areas are friction points for the strategy of tension. Because if you need a war, you activate one of them. They created post-World War II war on demand. And they did all of this knowingly. This was not a mistake. This wasn't, oh, yeah, let's just create Pakistan out of the goodness of our hearts, or let's take a Chinese island called Taiwan and we're going to put a Chinese general called Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan, which, by the way, was called Formosa. And then we just changed the name. And the first day he gets there, he declares martial law because none of the Formosans wanted a Chinese general that was thrust on them by the remnants of the USS and the soon-to-be CIA. So they set him up. Chiang Kai-shek in China lost the Civil War to Mao because Chiang Kai-shek was the conduit of opium into China from India. So you have the British Empire, who owns India, shipping opium into China, drugging all of the Chinese, and Mao was like, nope, time out. Get that shit out of here. And so there's a civil war going on. There's a bunch of warlords. And Chiang Kai-shek pays for his war with Mao using opium. And a guy by the name of Colonel Paul Helliwell was the OSS military liaison to Chiang Kai-shek. And he's best friends with Allen Dulles. And so he picks up the phone and he says, hey, Allen. Now, Allen's in Switzerland at the time because World War II is not even over. Mm-hmm. He goes, hey, I got this Chinese general here, and, you know, he's selling opium to pay for covert operations to fund his civil war. And Alan Dulles goes, dang, that's a great idea. I don't co-opt him and bring him into our fold so that we can use covert selling of drugs. Iran-Contra, anybody? And we will fund our covert operation called Operation Gladio throughout NATO with drug money because it's not accountable to anyone. So they bring, when he lost the civil war in China, they take him and relocate him to Burma. Well, eventually Burmese, in short order, gets tired of all of the murders and all of the crap that's going on in northern Burma, and they kick him out. It was the CIA that set Chiang Kai-shek up in Taiwan on an island called Formosa. There are declassified State Department documents that are sent back to the State Department. And who was in charge? Oh, Alan Dulles or John Foster Dulles. And they're saying, you know, they're bayoneting people outside the embassy in Taiwan, right? The guy you just dumped on the island here. They're bayoneting people. They're killing people. They killed thousands and thousands of Formosans who did not want a drug king as their quote unquote president. Another thing I had no idea when the UN was originally set up and the Security Council was formed, the seat that was labeled China actually was occupied by Chiang Kai-shek. They called Taiwan, and they still do today, like the Republic of China. And so everything that you read post-World War II for probably like the first 20 years, when they refer to China, they're talking about Chiang Kai-shek. They are not talking about China. And so that requires you to go back and reread everything that you think you know. Uh-huh. So that, again, for someone like me who has been brainwashed to hate China, you have to understand the history of China. And I'm going to throw in two more pieces of information, and feel free to fact check me on all of this. The entire operation around Tibet. So Tibet had always been an autonomous region in the Greater China area. And the CIA decided that they were going to use Tibet to launch Operation Gladio style stay-behinds. They took guerrillas out of Tibet. They flew them into Colorado in a decommissioned World War II base in the mountains of Colorado and trained them to be snipers, how to torture people, and how to kidnap people, and how to kill people.
Lovely.
Then they fly them back into Tibet and to launch internal operations to mainland China. And do you know that we did the exact same thing with Uyghurs in Nepal?
Oh, boy.
We did the exact same thing with Uyghurs in Nepal.
What was the time frame of that? Do you know?
Much more recently.
Yeah.
But still in the past, you know, they started that program. I don't remember time frame wise. It may have been. Yeah.
And so, when you mentioned the term stay behind, army, what was it? Stay behind
units.
Units. For someone that this is their Gladio, Operation Gladio 101. What are you referring to when you say that?
All right. So we can talk about a little bit about the history because this is fascinating. Another aha moment. So if you go back to the late 1800s, like 1899, the British launched, and believe me, in this story, lots of crap goes back to the British, lots of it. Because again, they're the ones that originally was working with Chiang Kai-shek in China, given Indian opium, which was a British colony at the time, into China. So,
I mean, is it opium? I mean, it pops up throughout history. It's like the war drug of choice.
Correct. Well, it's the perfect drug to generate cash money covertly. Mm-hmm. So, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the British fought two wars in the southern part of Africa against the Boers, Boers. They were called Boer War I and II. So the first Boer War, the British had already had Rhodesia and had found gold and all kinds of minerals that they were using in international trade. So they surmised, Cecil Rhodes surmised that the Boer farmland area, because that's all they were farmers, which is so interesting because we just brought a whole bunch of farmers from that geographical region into the United States recently. That's why this is so important.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted that territory. The Boers weren't moving. So they decided they're going to attack them and kill them. So they launched Boer War number 1. But through informal networking, the Boers learned that the British were on their way. So they go out and they stash a whole bunch of weapons and they bury them. There's weapon caches. The only way to get to where they were at was one particular route. So they stashed, that's the original use of stay behind units. So they stashed weapons for people, the Boers, to come in behind the British soldiers and get these weapons, because logistically they wouldn't have the ability to pre-position these once they were attacked. So they sneak in behind the British soldiers that are attacking the Boers. The weapons are already there. They use the weapons, and the British outnumbered them and had more sophisticated weapons, and they defeated the British. So the British has to go home in complete shame and embarrassment that they were defeated by a bunch of farmers. Well, do you know that in that group of British soldiers, there was a journalist that was embedded in them? And do you know what his name was? Winston Churchill.
I was wondering if that's where Winston came in. I knew he was in South Africa.
Yes. So Winston Churchill goes back. Now he has this whole concept. So they come in a second time. The first use of concentration camps happened there. They rounded up as they went through the Boer area, and they put all of the women and children and old people in these basic concentration camps, and they all died. And then they killed basically the majority of the farmers and took over the land. So that's the original use of stay behind units that I was able to discover. So you fast forward, the British created a thing called Jedburghs, Jedburgh. And just so that you know, one of the elite groups at Fort Bragg actually calls themselves Jedburghs. So this stay behind concept is very well utilized throughout NATO. And I'm not even sure most of them know where the origins of this is or what it was used for. So anyway, we go through World War I, and we've already talked about the Bolshevik Revolution happens, World War I happens, and we get to World War II. In 1942, two things happen. Hitler officially launches a stay behind unit concept. They called it werewolf units. Werewolf meaning citizen by day and killer by night. So it was ordinary citizens that had been trained in all of those things that I talked about: assassination, bombings, torture, kidnapping, all of that stuff. And as they moved east into the Soviet Union, they set up these stay behind units with the thought that if they get pushed back to the west, they would have pre-positioned weapons and people trained, embedded in the civilian population to attack the Russians from the rear. So Hitler has an extensive, everywhere Hitler went, when he captured France, when he captured the Netherlands, when he captured Hungary, Romania, all of those Eastern European countries, to include Ukraine. He trained stay behind units. The current Azov Battalion and Reich Sector Nazi units trace themselves back to a guy, Dara Detko, and every one of Otto Skorzeny, which was Hitler under Reinhard Galen's trainer for the stay behind networks.
Okay, and repeat that name. You broke up for a second there. What was
Otto Skorzeny?
No, before that. Someone in Ukraine there.
Lebed, Lebed,
Okay.
Stetsko, Stetsko, SKO, who, by the way, was invited to the White House and has pictures with Ronald Reagan.
And people, as you're telling this story, it's, and when I say story, I mean this history. It is important to remember history didn't start when you were born. History didn't start when the latest news cycle out of Ukraine in 2014 started, or 2022. I mean, everything is connected. You could go back forever. It's just absolutely fascinating. Continue, please.
Okay, so again, the current Nazis that Russia said the denazification of Ukraine will happen, and he will get rid of every last one of them, because this history goes back to World War II. Mm-hmm. And what they did, 25 million people in Russia, and later another 25 million, were murdered as a part of the Nazi German front invading the Soviet Union. Okay, 25 million. And that number needs to be stuck in your head, because I'm going to show you the lunacy of how they justified setting this entire apparatus up under NATO in a minute. So anyway, we've got all these stay-behind units all over Nazi territory. So as we get close to the end of World War II, there's a meeting that Alan Dulles has in northern Italy, because they're all in Italy too, because the Nazis basically had pushed into there, Greece, and everywhere else. So all of these stay-behind units are there. Reinhard Galen, Hitler's number one guy that set up the stay-behind unit program, werewolf units, meets with Alan Dulles in northern Italy. Another interesting guy that was there is a guy by the name of James Jesus Angleton. He eventually ends up as not only just the Vatican desk officer, but he is also the Mossad desk officer in the CIA. He has 2 monuments in Israel dedicated to him. So he's the conduit for conversations between the Vatican, Mossad, and the CIA. He's at this meeting too. So Reinhard Galen says, hey, here's a list of the people that know about Operation Gladio, the stay-behind networks. Mm-hmm. I'll give you this list, and I'll tell you where all of this stuff is and who. So the stay-behind units were basically like 20 to 25 people. They had large caches of weapons that they buried, generally in forested areas. But they all knew where they were at, so that they could go and get their weapons and do whatever their mission was. And their missions were assassinations and all kinds of things like that. So Reinhard Galen says, I'm going to make you a deal. You save my life and the names of these people on this list, and I'm going to tell you where all of these things are. And we can then use them together to orchestrate post-World War II chaos. So Alan Dulles contacts Wild Bill Donovan. Do you know who the general was? Eisenhower. And a few years later, Eisenhower becomes president. He's aware of all of this. And do you know who his logistics officer was, Eisenhower's, during World War II at this period? A guy by the name of Major General Lyman Lemitsker. And I'll explain to you why he's important in a minute. Because he's very, very important to this, because he would have been the guy that was setting up the logistical piece of locating all of these things, making sure that they now had new U.S. and NATO weapons in these caches. So, and by the way, we've got to seed them in all of the other territories. We got to put them in Spain. We've got to put them in Portugal, because they were neutral. So everybody that eventually joins NATO is going to have a stay behind.
So hang on a second, just from someone that's naive to the history of NATO, I'm just looking ahead here. My spidey senses here. Is this foreshadowing that NATO not really just there to defend Europe from the communist threat?
Well, I just told you, you articulate a threat to me when 25 million of your people are dead, mm-hmm. and all of your industry has been wiped out. What's the threat?
Right.
But when NATO stands up, that is exactly the threat that was used in declassified documents that justify the creation of Operation Gladio and these stay-behind units.
Okay.
But what I thought your spidey senses was going to do, because this took me months, I did all of this research of NATO and all of Europe, and I'm doing all this digging. And one day I was sitting in my research area and I went, we're part of NATO.
Yeah.
Where's ours?
Oh,
There's a document that was signed when this all was set up that said, if you join NATO, you have to have stay-behind units. This is back in the 1940s.
I have a guess. Is it under the Denver International Airport?
No.
No. Okay.
Not one I found anyway. But so again, Alan Dulles flies Reinhard Galen, a Nazi general in a U.S. Army 4-star uniform, into Washington, D.C., and he spends a couple of weeks in their OSS office and basically debriefs everybody on what the stay-behind networks are, how they operate, and they immediately go, this is it. We got to have this. So when NATO first, and again, I'm admitting to everybody my total ignorance. All of the education that I've had in the Air Force, I did not know that NATO was originally set up in Paris. Did you know that?
I mean, I would have guessed somewhere in Europe, but I wouldn't have thought Paris.
Right, but that's not where it's at now.
Right.
Do you know why they're not in Paris anymore? Because
Brussels now, right?
Yeah.
Is it prettier there? No.
These stay-behind units, the French stay-behind unit program was basically under the auspices of an organization called OAS. The OAS tried to assassinate Charles de Gaulle over 20 times.
Wow. Because
Charles de Gaulle was working with JFK, and they were successful on that assassination, to basically implement peace. JFK had a back door into the Soviet Union. He was in negotiations with Cuba. He didn't want any of this crap going on anymore.
Right.
The shatter the CIA to 1,000 pieces had way more meaning than any of us ever realized.
Mm-hmm.
So he's starting to understand this operation. And Charles de Gaulle calls the officer that was in charge of NATO at the time into his office, and he says, you've got 6 months to move your shit out of my country. You're gone. He pulled France out of NATO. France militarily was out of NATO until 2009, something like that. Most people don't even know that.
No.
So, do you know who the general that was in charge of NATO at the time? Lyman Leminsker. So the guy that set up Operation Gladio's logistics for Eisenhower in Europe, eventually ends up as the NATO commander. And he's running this entire operation as such. So, can
we pause for just one quick second?
Sure.
Because there's a comment here from Kara 3022. Is this the reason for Eisenhower's warning of the military-industrial complex? Because I've always thought that farewell speech was very foreboding and almost like he was warning us and the military-industrial complex that was well on its way. But as you're detailing this history of Operation Gladio, do we need to take a step back? Is Eisenhower a good guy or a bad guy in this?
He is a bad guy.
Oh, hell.
He was not warning us. He was not warning us. He was telling us what he had just done.
Damn. Oh.
Because Eisenhower is the president that authorized the overthrow of Guatemala. He also authorized the overthrow of the Congo, the assassination of Lumumba. He authorized the assassination of Lumumba on January 17th. That's when he was murdered. that 3 days before President Kennedy takes office, President Kennedy didn't even know his CIA had assassinated Lumumba until 2 or 3 weeks later.
Wow.
So Eisenhower's not a good guy.
What did we say earlier? Everything you know is wrong.
Oh, and do you know the first assassination or the first CIA overthrow of a government that Eisenhower authorized? Iran.
Okay.
Yeah, they overthrew Prime Minister Mossadegh.
I knew that we did that, but I've never taken a step back and looked into it. It was Eisenhower.
Authorized the overthrow of Iran.
I mean, how far back can, honestly, how far back in our history as a nation can we go with our overthrow? I mean, I was about to say Hawaii. Grover Cleveland tried to stand up to that. Then you could go back even further to Japan and intimidating them. I mean, is it our entire history?
So let's talk about that for a second. The overthrow of Hawaii and the deposing of the queen there is very interesting from not just a historical standpoint, but it shows the entire operation of how the syndicate operates. So, and again, when I say it crosses all religions, Hawaii is a great example of that. Now, obviously we were doing this, but I'm going to show you on a timeline the transition. So in Hawaii, obviously, it's in the late 1800s. We don't have a CIA, but we do have a State Department. We don't have a standing military, but we do have a Navy to some extent. So in the Navy was basically to guard trade. It wasn't like we had a Department of Defense and, this big standing military apparatus. So in Hawaii, you had a whole bunch of missionaries, and they come into play in many of these stories. The missionaries went to Hawaii because they thought they were godless heathens, and they literally said this. And they were going to convert them to Christianity. Mm-hmm. They didn't really want to be Christians. They wanted to just be Hawaiians. But that wasn't allowed. So they're going to go there and they're going to witness to the Hawaiians. Well, they made so much money there that they began buying up sugar plantations there. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. government had changed the way sugar was going to be. They had like a price quota system going in the continental United States. Well, Hawaii was a state. So they basically were going to go bankrupt. So they make several trips to the State Department and say, hey, this is hurting us. And, Hawaii has a geographical significance because you want to go to trade with China and Japan and all this stuff. So how about if we overthrow the queen, because the queen was going to give voting rights to everybody, kind of that democracy thing that we say we're spreading everywhere. The problem was that the majority of the workers on the sugar plantations were Chinese, basically slaves. There was like 42,000 Chinese slaves there. And so they were like, we can't let them vote because all of our land's going to get taken back that we've collected in these sugar plantations and stuff through some shady deals with the king. And so the new queen, his daughter, was going to basically put Hawaii back the way it was before the missionaries got there, and they were not going to have it. So they make arrangements to bring naval ships off the coast. They created a fake uprising in basically the same regime change thing, and they buy off 4 of her ministers and basically depose the queen. And if you use that model, so it's all about the moneyed people orchestrating regime change, using the threat of a military presence in order to do this. And it's all about the control of the resources. So Hawaii became basically like Guam, asked the United States. So then they got their reprieve on the sugar that allowed them to continue enriching themselves at the cost of Hawaii people proper.
Right. And the one guy who stood in the breach and tried to prevent that from happening was President Grover Cleveland. And of course, he couldn't remain president forever. And so when he was out of office, immediately Hawaii becomes part of the United States. And to this day, if you go to Grover Cleveland's boyhood home in New Jersey, there is a picture of his either grandson or great-grandson who goes there, I think, every year. He looks just like him, by the way. They have a picture, and he has a lei around his neck with the locals there. Grover Cleveland, the hero to Hawaiians to this day, because he tried to stop this insanity, this takeover.
Yeah. So that's how we ended up with Panama. So the whole story of the Panama Canal is fascinating. Again, I didn't know any of this. The Panama Canal was actually going to be a French project. It was a French project. The Congress had approved a Nicaraguan canal, not Panama. And Nicaragua would have been a much better place. But there was an entire Sullivan and Cromwell, which is where Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles were lawyers at, orchestrated the fake threat of doing it in Nicaragua because they had been hired by the French company that had began building the Panama Canal, and they had used like 40,000 French colony African slaves to do the work. 40% of the canal was already built by the time we got involved in it. And the company in France that was building the Panama Canal had went bankrupt. They were on the threshold of going bankrupt. So they hired Sullivan and Cromwell to convince the U.S. Senate to change. And basically, there was already a law passed. There had already been funding, and initial construction of the Nicaraguan canal began. So there's all of this shenanigans that goes on in Washington, D.C. to undo that law and approve the Panama Canal. And they did it by hiring a PR firm that faked a postage stamp with a volcano on it next to the canal, which was nowhere near the canal, to convince the Senate that they needed to back out of that deal and not build it in Nicaragua because it would be destroyed by this inactive volcano. And so they got Sullivan and Cromwell, Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, got the U.S. government to approve the Panama Canal. Well, the problem was that Panama was a state in Colombia. Panama was not its own country.
Interesting.
So we go to Colombia and say, hey, we want to do this. And Colombia says it's going to cost you $20 million. And you basically can have your like 10 miles, 8 miles, whatever it is on everything that they wanted, they could get, but it was going to be $20 million. And they said, basically, screw you. So they sent Smedley Butler, the guy that is famous for his War is a Racket book, as part of the Marine contingent that went down working with the people in Panama. They already decided who was going to be the first president, paid him a bunch of money, and staged basically a fake insurrection and stole Panama from Colombia. And immediately upon the fake insurrection, they planted a flag, said, we're now our own country, and the U.S. government immediately recognized them.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar.
Again, as you start moving through the timeline, and we're not even up to the OSS or World War II.
And you know what? And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to interject here to say, please take your time. If we hit an hour from now, if we need a part 2, a part 3, whatever, I'll keep having you back. So I don't know if your calendar that you originally sent me is still applicable, but I've already been eyeballing July 24th. If that's still open, we might need at least a part 2. So please take your time in laying this out, please.
So you start to see a pattern that predates all of this. So what they wanted to do, now keep in mind, this costs companies a lot of money, right? They're having to pay off people. They're having to pay for their own private intelligence to gather information on who is bribable and who's not. They're having to pay their own paramilitary forces to go in and soften up the target. So that's a lot of money out of companies like United Fruit and all of those people that were doing this stuff. And Anaconda, the mining company that was doing this in Africa. This is a lot of money for them.
Yeah.
So post-World War II, the syndicate collectively decides, you know what? If we had a central intelligence and a standing military, we could offload all of that cost of doing business onto the American taxpayers, you know, because we're the same guys that created the 1913 individual tax and the Fed. So we can offload this off our balance sheet onto the American taxpayers. So for the first time ever, we have a standing military and we have a standing CIA agent. But it gets better, because you know what happened in the 1990s? So now, instead of the private companies like the British East and West Indies and all of those having their own private military and private intelligence apparatus, they offload all of that off their company books and put it on the taxpayers around the world. So now everybody around the world, Korea, Japan, everybody, they have a standing military and they have a central intelligence apparatus. They all collectively work together. Then in the 1990s, they got another brilliant idea and they said, you know what? We may get a Donald Trump as president, and there may be some problems with us actually controlling this, because everybody thinks Jimmy Carter was the worst president ever. But do you know that he is the one that fired all of the covert operations out of the CIA? It's called the Halloween Massacre. It happened on October 31st, his first year in office. And they didn't want that to ever happen again. So they basically began in the 1990s under Bill Clinton outsourcing intelligence and military to private military companies and private intelligence companies, you know, like Q Intel and all of those other things that are floating out there, Blackwater. Well, do you know who all owns them today? The same people that started this whole thing. They are owned by all of the International Syndicate. So now they have offloaded the cost onto us of paying for it. And then they actually bought up all of the individual companies that now get the contracts for that. So they're now profiting off of their outsourcing. So not only
just evil geniuses, man.
They're evil geniuses. So that I actually have a like a slide that depicts that. So here's them having to fund it. Here's the phase where they offloaded it to us. And the third phase of the thing was set up all of the companies that the taxpayer dollars are going to contract to, and we can make money off of what we got off our balance sheets back here in step one. So that's basically the apparatus that we're under right now, with all of the private intelligence and the private military contractors operating in wars.
You detail this in the insidious history and how we are funding our own destruction, the destruction around the world for countries and leaders and the people. It's it really makes you feel stupid. It makes you feel stupid that you wake your ass up at in my case, very early, go to work, never have any energy, pay my taxes, work hard, look, American dreams right there. If you just work hard and pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Meanwhile, we are literally funding our destruction, and it's enraging, honestly, to hear you lay this out like this.
So the meme of the firefight where the missiles are launching and it says my tax dollars and somehow my tax dollars.
Yes,
that's it.
I see that. That's
Operation Gladio in a meme,
right? And it's also the stuff in the streets in LA. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And you know what it is? It's exactly what you started with: chaos and control.
Correct. That's what it is.
Funding it all, both sides. It's just maddening to hear you tell it like this.
It kind of, and that's why no one will talk about this. Even people that will feed you little, like what I refer to as limited hangout. They will tell you little snippets of it, but they can't paint the whole picture, because once everybody has the whole picture, we become dangerous, not them.
What percentage of, and this is not a fair question, I'll tell you up front, if you went to Washington, D.C., and you had all of the Congress and all of the Senate, President, what percentage of the individuals there that make up our federal government, those right there in the legislative and executive branch, what percentage would you say understand all of these tentacles and how it is all connected? Any thoughts on, do you have a number?
I don't know that anybody in the Senate does, or the House. Now that you have Trump's team in there, I believe with all my heart that the upper echelons of Trump's administration knows everything I just told you. I believe that there is a select group of people that know most of what I told you, because they're part of it in prior administrations.
And outside of you educating the masses, everybody that knows all of the details of this and how far back it stretches and where it stretches, they're probably, to a man, all making beaucoup bucks off of this.
That's exactly right. Which is why we don't know anything about it.
And which is why nobody that knows wants to change this.
Correct.
It's a cash cow.
It 100% is. So if you go back to where we left off the story of Reinhard Galen working with Alan Dulles to set up this under NATO. So where did Reinhard Galen end up? Reinhard Galen, a Nazi, ended up as the West German chief of intel, Alan Dulles' counterpart under the first chancellor of West Germany, Adenauer. So
West German, the free side of Germany after the war.
The denazified.
Right.
The entire denazification process, and we hired a Nazi to run the central intelligence apparatus in Germany. Now, another one of those really odd stories that I ran across, speaking of Reinhard Galen and Alan Dulles, they decided that they needed an apparatus to be able to spy on every country in the world, right? They're spies. Mm-hmm. So there was a company that existed during World War II, and a man that had worked with NSA to create an encryption machine that allowed you to send diplomatic cables encrypted. So they make a deal with this guy that we're going to set you up over here in neutral Switzerland, and we're going to take your country or your company. He's actually Swedish by birth. And most of these roads dually go back to the city of London and Sweden for reasons that will become obvious eventually. But so this Swedish guy, he's in collusion with the German BND and the CIA. He sets up his company in Switzerland. He hires a whole bunch of salesmen to go to every country in the world and sell this encrypted machine under the auspices that allows you to send diplomatic cables to all of your embassies. And it's secured. What they didn't know, the salesman, but the guy knew, and Reinhard Galen and Alan Dulles knew, is there's a back door to this encrypted machine. And so up until 2020, Crypto AG operated around the world in over 120 countries with a back door to it. Now, when this guy got older, and his son, the CIA wasn't really sure that he was going to be able to be read into this and go along with it. So they didn't want to take a chance. The guy's getting a little older. So the CIA officially goes in and buys the company through a front company. And Germans own like 40%, 45%. CIA owned 45% of the company, and then 10% was given to the front company to actually pretend like they own the company.
Right.
And if you go down the list of the countries that had this equipment, and you look at how many countries were couped and when they were couped, and supposedly the CIA was surprised, or this event happened and supposedly they were surprised.
Oh, we're so shocked.
There's not a single thing that happened in 120 countries from the post-World War II until 2020 that the CIA didn't know about, because 120 countries had this equipment, and every single cable that was sent from their country to any of their embassies was spied on by the CIA and by the German BND. Now, eventually...
how did this get discovered?
Trump shut it down. He shut it down in 2020.
No wonder the deep state hates him so much.
So...
Took away their eavesdropping device.
That opened a completely different world to me when I stumbled across Crypto AG. And again, I've never heard of it. Most people's never heard of that company. And you can go read on it's talked about a lot. If you go on Yandex and just type in Crypto AG, everything I just told you is out there. Interestingly enough, Iran bought the equipment. Iran found out that they were being spied on and left the equipment in place. So that tells me that the Iranian government was in bed with the CIA.
Do you know when that was, when Iran discovered?
I can look it up. I don't have the exact date.
But a while back, like I'm trying to get an idea of if you know which regime. We're talking about before or after the Islamic Revolution, 1979.
Well, that was all. That's not anything that you think it is either. Absolutely is not what you thought it was.
Okay, go ahead.
Because here's the telltale sign. Under the Shah, after they overthrow Mossadegh, they bring in a guy by the name of Major General Norman Schwarzkopf Senior.
Okay. All right. So not Gulf War.
No, his dad.
All right.
They bring in him to set up the secret intelligence and police force called the Savak in Iran. He is also the father of the New Jersey National Police, the state police. He created their state police, which is why we should suspect most of the police. They operate in many cases, and I've established it 100% with Los Angeles. They had CIA agents embedded in the Los Angeles Police Department. And that's a whole nother story. So anyway, Major General Norman Schwarzkopf goes to Iran, sets up this thing called the Savak. The Savak oppressed everybody that was not in the upper middle class and elite class of Iran. All of the pictures you see on the internet about how Iran flourished under the Shah and everything was great. No, it wasn't. Those pictures are in Tehran and a couple of their major cities. The rest of Iran was ran like a prison camp for the Shah. Torture, kidnapping, murder, anybody. They had one party. They had no free press. So this Savak host supposedly a revolution that was going to change everything, except it didn't change the Savak, which was basically, and oh, by the way, halfway through the Shah's tenure, do you know who took over the training from MI6 and the CIA? Mossad. And do you know, and oh, by the way,
everything you know is wrong.
What was going on in the 1980s? With Iran? Weren't we selling them missiles covertly called the Iran-Contra?
Yeah.
And we were selling them missiles while we were supplying Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war.
It's just one thing after another, isn't it?
It is.
It's so...
Nothing about our history is true.
Should we throw away every history book that's sitting on our shelves?
We pretty much need to.
God.
We could have a book burning
Seriously. Ah,
It's crazy.
it sure is.
And the beautiful thing for me, because I had all of this history already in my head. So when I learn this new stuff, I'm easily able to slide it in.
Right. Okay.
Everybody thinks is true versus what is true. So I'm able to do something because of all of the reading that I had already done that most people can't do. And again, I am very honest with people. Books that I have read in the past that I skipped right over much of, and I'll give you a great example. Whitney Webb's book, One Nation Under Blackmail. I read that like 3 or 4 years ago when it first came out, whenever that was, 4 or 5 years ago. I could not put that book down. I found it fascinating. What I didn't know is her entire first volume of that book is Operation Gladio.
Interesting.
And she doesn't even know it. All of the drug networks, all of the Resort International down in the Bahamas, the Castle Bank set up by who? Paul Helliwell, to launder the money that he had set up with Chiang Kai-shek. All of the things that she describes in that first volume is 100% Operation Gladio. The second volume, exposing the blackmail around the mega group and all that stuff with Jeffrey Epstein, that's the blackmail that allowed all of this to happen. She is talking in those 2 volumes of nothing but Operation Gladio.
Okay, so let me interject with a completely unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you had to pick you don't have to pick a year, but a rough decade where the United States of America went off the rails, and you can say the 1770s, but I'm just curious, if you had to pick a decade, okay, Colonel, what decade did the United States go off the rails?
I couldn't put.
Okay, just wanted to ask.
So obviously, I've traced it back to the late 1800s.
Sure.
The reason why I stopped there is because I came across a group called the Fabian Society over in Britain.
Okay. Yes.
Cynthia Chung wrote the best book of the description of the Fabian Society. It's the sun, the
I'm with you.
Her book. It's the something that where the sun never sets. The black something where the sun never sets. The black sun where the something like that. Anyway,
no, and they have what is their oh gosh, as you're trying to remember what she said, I'm trying to
well, no, I remember what she says. I just don't remember the name of her book.
Oh, the name of the book. I'm sorry.
So she basically lays out that the Fabian Society, made up of like Oswald Mosley, Cecil Rhodes, and all of the people that have featured prominently in everything that we were just talking about, Lord Balfour, all of those people, were all involved in the Fabian Society. And the Fabian Society is famous for basically wanting a one world government.
Yeah.
And their vision of a one world government was that it was going to be broken up into geographical regions, that you were going to have a pan-America, a pan-Europe, a pan-British Empire, a pan-Asia, and eventually a pan-Arabic. But they left out Africa. And they were very clear on why they left it out, because they were enslaving Africa. Africa was going to be the slave machine because it had all the resources. It could never be free. They had to control Africa. And that's why what you see recently with like Burkina Faso and all of these countries in Africa breaking out from under this colonialist empire control is so fascinating to me, because they, even after they quote unquote granted them, like you can grant people their freedom in the late 50s, early 60s, they weren't free. Because post-World War II, they set up the IMF and the World Bank, and they still controlled them all. They controlled them economically. They controlled them politically. And if anybody like Patrice Lumumba got out of line and tried to enrich his own country and cut out their previous colonial overlords, they murdered him. And that's why so many coups has happened in Africa. And the destabilization there is so that they can control the resources.
And I remember my boss over at the Blaze, Glenn Beck, when he was exposing the Fabian Society, my gosh, probably 15 years ago on Fox at this point. But I cannot find there's a stained glass window, and it talks about remaking the world in our image. But for those that maybe aren't familiar, the Fabian Society is a British socialist organization whose purpose is to advance the principles of social democracy and democratic socialism via gradualist and reformist effort in democracies rather than by revolutionary overthrow. It's like a slow burn socialist takeover. They were founded in Britain, as you said, 1884.
And what's their motto? What's their logo? What's the picture?
It's them hammering out the earth.
It's a sheep with a fox, or it's a fox with sheep clothing.
Yes, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Yes, and they're. I can't find the thing. I didn't know Fabian Society was going to come up here, but people should definitely look into the Fabian Society. It's
behind all of this.
Yes,
their principles are.
Oh, here you go. Here you go. I got this right here. So let me make this dimmer, or else it won't show up very well. Hang on. Here's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Look at that. Look at that. That's the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yep.
And then there's the stained glass window where, like I said, they're hammering out. They're heating up. That's what it's all coming back to me now, Colonel. They're heating up the Earth or the planet, the world, all the countries in chaos.
Yeah.
They're heating it up, and then they're hammering it out into their own form. Oh my gosh! I swear, how many episodes? How many episodes are we gonna need for this? Okay, continue.
It is a very interesting. Once you start slowly rolling down, you start picking up speed as you become more familiar with the concepts. And that's their worst fear, because all of these fit patterns. When you go conflict by conflict, if you go country by country and you start studying the actual coups that happened, there will be the same ambassadors. There will be the same CIA station chiefs. There will be the same NGOs. There will be the same apparatus in all of these, the same IMF backstory, the same World Bank backstory. And so once you recognize the pattern, what it allows you to do today is you look at what's happening in Europe right now with Slovakia, where they tried to assassinate the president, this uproar in Georgia, where they tried to pass a FARA law. Well, they can't control you if there's light being shown on who these registered foreign agents are. And so all of this exposure, I just see, and that's what gives me hope. I want everybody to understand the history because it's very important. But what I am seeing today is the dismantling of all of this, because when you look at USAID, which prior to USAID, everybody likes to go, oh, well, that can't be that bad. You know, that was set up in Kennedy's time. No, it wasn't. AID shows up in history books that I read well before Kennedy. It was reorganized into USAID, and his vision was that it was going to help people get on their feet and become their own independent country. USAID has functioned as a CIA front since the 1960s. One of the most not talked about organizations, though, in current times is the National Endowment for Democracy. Because this is important to understand for how this operates. Because it highlights everything and why this is a uniparty effort. It is not a Democrat. It is not a Republican. Yeah. The National Endowment for Democracy was set up with 4 entities. One for the Republicans called the International Republican Institute. One for the Democrats called the, NDI, National Democrat Institute. One for the unions and one for the Chamber of Commerce. So you have the Chamber of Commerce, which represents the International Syndicate, all of the oligarchs in the United States, worldwide. You have the unions, which are their jackboots. That's how they get people out in the streets to organize, to overthrow governments. And you have, go look at the pages for the IRI and the NDI. At the bottom of the page, even on Wikipedia, it tells you where they have spent their money in overthrowing governments. Do you know that the entire time John McCain was in the Senate, he was the chairman of the IRI for 25 years. He ran every coup for the 25 years with funding, which is why you see him at the Maidan Revolution in Ukraine in 2014. He was not there as a sitting senator. He was there as a representative who helped fund it as the IRI chairperson.
Holy shit. Okay, so I swear. Is this the book title, by the way, The Empire on Which the Black Sun Never Set? Okay, yes. Thank you for that, Renee. You know what you're reminding me of with all of these individuals, these leaders that step out of line, and the next thing you know, they're laying face down in a pool of their own blood. It reminds me of a section in Robert Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, where he goes through all of these assassinations, or I'm sorry, let me back up. And this is modern history. This is just during COVID,
yes.
2021 or so, 2022. This list of world leaders that met untimely deaths. And what did they have in common? They all resisted the vaccine being imposed upon their populations, which, if you take another step back here, as I've learned to do today with you, is you got the chaos, COVID-19, the control, the vaccine, and all the lockdowns and so on. And those that resist that meet an untimely death.
Correct. It's all the same thing. They used a bioweapon as opposed to a normal weapon. It's all the same thing.
This is fun. So where are we in history now in our presentation today?
So, I don't know. Let me get back to my.
Yeah, no, I've derailed you all over the place. Take your time, please.
Okay, so we talked about the one world government origins, and we talked about the redrawing of all the lines in order to enable chaos. So one of the most important aspects of that post-World War II and all of the redrawn country maps was they now have basically a hotline for chaos. All they have to do is activate their agents in some of these newly created countries.
Which were Pakistan, Israel,
and Taiwan.
And was there a fourth one I think you mentioned?
Well, I said that they basically dissolved Kurdistan.
Okay, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, so they put the Kurdish people who don't want to blend in with any of those surrounding countries. And so there has been perpetual war attacks against the Kurds from Turkey, from Syria, from Iraq, and from less from Iran. But
right. And a large part of the audience wasn't a part of the early moments of the conversation where you explained the three spokes of for conflict. It was drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and human trafficking. And so it's just all these cycles. That's how they fund it. Okay, yeah. And so when you see this stuff pop up in the news, it's not just, a cycle of human events. It's manufactured crisis.
Correct. Yeah, I would be skeptical that anything in our history was organic. Like literally anything. Yes, that's the
that's the takeaway for sure.
So, going back to how they set this thing up. So, you've got Reinhard Galen in the German BND. They set up a Korea CIA. That's literally what it's called, KCIA. They have the same war criminals, by the way, in Japan that was responsible for the imprisonment, the labor camps of our troops in the Japanese theater, all end up in these apparatuses. So they create some very interesting organizations, NATO being one of them. But they also created in Asia, the counterpart to NATO, was an organization called the Asian People's Anti-Communist League. That morphs into a thing called the World Anti-Communist League. And the World Anti-Communist League, if you go back and look at the history of that, had nothing to do with anti-communist. It was another mislabeling intentionally of an organization. Because if I came to you and I said, would you join the World Anti-Communist League? Well, I'm anti-communist. I don't want to live under communism, right? Well, but that everybody that created the World Anti-Communist League were components of fascism. They took all of the Stetsko, Bandera, all of those people. They took all of the fascists that were left in Albania and Romania and all of those. They took all of the fascists that were in Japan, Chiang Kai-shek, all of them. And the fascists that we stood up in Korea, the Park and Rhee and all of those people, they are the ones that created this World Anti-Communist League. So it has nothing to do with communists and being anti-communist, other than the fact that it's really housing the fascist international apparatus that was created. And that's why I said we did not win World War II, back to your original question. What they did was they took an overt war that they were losing and switched it into a covert war in order to disperse the Nazis all over the world. And they did. They went to Egypt. They went to South America. They went to Japan. They went everywhere. And they went to some of the African countries, especially Algeria, where it was still a French colony at the time. So this disbursement, non-accountability of this fascist international apparatus has encircled the globe. And it's been operating underneath our nose this entire time. And you start tracing the roots of these people, and they come up in some of the weirdest places. So Scorzini played a central, Otto Scorzini, lieutenant colonel, SS officer. He originally, because NATO was going to be set up in Paris, he originally went to Paris, but he has this big gashing scar across his cheek and was immediately noticed. So they moved him into Spain. And at the time, Spain was ran by Franco, who was a fascist himself. And so all of the training camps for this new organization that was going to be set up in NATO, primarily initially was set up in Spain under Franco. It eventually branched out to the Canary Islands, to the island of Sardinia. As a matter of fact, the specialty for the island of Sardinia was kidnapping. That's where you went to the kidnapping camp at. You went to underwater training on the Canary Islands. And weirdly enough, Robert Maxwell disappeared and was murdered right off the Canary Islands. Don't know if there's any connection there, but that was a terrorist training camp there on the Canary Islands. So all of these organizations, all of these terror training camps were set up all over. And they were sending the people that they had designated to create this new stay behind in post-World War II throughout NATO. And weirdly enough, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden was not in NATO, but they all had Gladio units set up by William Colby, who goes on to be the CIA chief.
Oh,
so you have basically the entire CIA that is, and interestingly enough, we all know that the CIA has basically two fronts, so we're told. They have an intelligence gathering and they have the operations branch. The intelligence gathering doesn't gather intelligence. They create intelligence that are fed to the operators to go do what they want to do. And then they pass that made up intelligence into Congress and to the president in order to do what the oligarchs, this international syndicate, wants to do, not what's because there's time over time in my research, especially like down in Guatemala. So after we couped Iran, we go to Guatemala, PV success. So in Guatemala, the entire operation was ran under the justification that the president was a communist. At the same time, we find out 30 years later that there were CIA cables going to the State Department and the CIA saying, there's no communists here. Mm-hmm. There's no communists. The guy's not a communist. But once it got to the CIA and then over to the president, they're communist. And Truman wrote a national security action memorandum that said you can assassinate someone if you label them first as a communist. Well, then everybody becomes a communist that we want to assassinate. And we are going to generate the intelligence to tell you that he's a communist. It was not until the fall of the Berlin Wall and the moving out just before the fall of the Berlin Wall, George H.W. Bush, who is president at the time, modifies that action memorandum to include the word terrorist. So now everybody's a terrorist that we want to kill.
Oh, see, oh my goodness. Oh, see here, I was worried about everybody being labeled a terrorist in the aftermath of 9/11. You're saying this designation goes back much earlier.
So what you learn very quickly in your research is they have to have a boogeyman. There has to be a boogeyman. So for the entire time that the Soviet Union, and keep in mind, the oligarchs created the Bolshevik Revolution. So they created their own boogeyman. They created their own boogeyman with Hitler. So they create it and then use it against us. So for the next, mid 1940s to the late 80s, we're going to use communists as a boogeyman. Well, then the whole crap falls out of my communist theory because the Soviet Union and China's not a threat yet. So I can't use them as the communist boogeyman. So I need an interim filler for my boogeyman picture on the wall that I can throw darts at. So I have to give birth to radical Islamic terrorists and trace back any one of them. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas. You're going to find the people that created it are in this network. ISIS and Al-Qaeda 100% are products of the CIA. Interestingly enough, and again, more recently for me, since I was at CENTCOM on 9/11 and didn't know any of this, and that's important because Central Command was the combatant commander that took us to war after 9/11. So I, sitting on the floor of the command center at U.S. Central Command, I see the intelligence that is shared with the command staff. I have a TSSCI clearance. This stuff is not one time did I know that in the year, like the 1999, actually from like 95 to 99, the Taliban had basically kept making strides in taking and pushing out the remnants of Al-Qaeda that the CIA had left behind that they created during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So we created all of the terrorists there. We created the through the ISI, their intelligence apparatus in that made-up country. And so it's a hotbed for shit. And so the Taliban finally comes basically back to power. And by the year 2000, almost every single opium plant in Afghanistan is gone. They have completely changed the agriculture of Afghanistan. They planted vineyards, olive trees, everything. They're changing everything. They're going to be an agrarian state, but they are going to have legitimate products. And then what happened in 2001 after the CIA's opium products get cut off? 9/11 happens. And where did we go? Oh my God. And bin Laden was a product of the CIA. There's pictures of him.
For sure.
So you have him just coincidentally put in Afghanistan to use as the justification to go to war. And Bush, all of the Bush families were in business with the bin Laden families. All of them. The bin Ladens came to Texas all the time from Houston. So we're going to plant bin Laden in Afghanistan as our excuse to go to kick the Taliban out. And
is this why the family gets escorted out of the country after 9/11? Because the Bushes,
100%.
They're so close.
100%. So, opium, and look at the chart. Just do a search on the internet. Opium production in Afghanistan from 1980 to 2010. Just do the search. Do the search. You're going to see this huge, big amount of opium. It drops down to almost nothing. And then immediately after we reinvade Afghanistan, it goes right back up, and and surpasses the previous level of opium production.
Well, this makes sense as to why after 9/11, the opium fields were left undisturbed and allowed to flourish. They
were reinstituted.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean that's where your funding is, right? I mean, this is. Okay, continue. This is. Yep, I'm listening. I'm a pissed off taxpayer. That's for damn sure. Okay.
None of it is by happenstance.
No.
So that's probably a lot of information.
Now, do you want to put a pin right there, or do you want to keep going?
No, I think that's probably a good place to stop. Because
so we're up to 9/11 now.
Well, I think what we should do the next time is kind of go back and go through one of the actual coups, so people can see the techniques used, because it's being used on us right now.
Ooh, what a teaser. I like that. That's good for our next visit there. Okay, so do you have your calendar available? Because I figure as long as I have you here in the audience, obviously, if they're like me and they have a feeling they are hanging on every word here. Go ahead. I was just going to say, you want to...
The 26th, because that's my buddy's change of command.
You can't do the 26th. No, that's fine. No, I was looking at your calendar here. What about July 24th? I hate to wait that long, but I know we've got some conflicts in between there. So what do you think? July 24th? Should we shoot for that?
July 24th looks great.
Okay. All right. So everybody, share this show, and thank you, Colonel, for all of your time today. Share this show with your friends and make sure that they absorb this between now and July 24th. So we will reconvene here for part 2 of Operation Gladio. And in fact, that's what I'm writing here. I'm writing down Operation Gladio Part 2. For July 24th. It's absolutely fascinating. It's equal parts fascinating and enraging.
Correct.
It's
I
love this. Right, I bet. I can't imagine this, especially with that extra layer of you serving your country. And
2.5 years.
2.5 years. Okay, so seriously, I love learning history. I absolutely love it. But holy crap, I hate it at the same time, because when your eyes are open, it makes your blood pressure go up. So, okay, Colonel Towner Watkins, Roxanne, Colonel Roxanne, dear God, I'm not even drinking today. There's just so many words there, So, yeah. So, okay. So, where can people find you? Remind us of your Rumble channel.
On Rumble, I'm at the Colonel's Corner. If you guys go to the Colonel's Corner, there's hundreds of hours of videos. I do book reviews. They're all on there. And the book, even if you want to read it yourself with me, is you're not just getting that book, you're getting the other 100 books read into that book. Because as we go chapter by chapter through books, I bring in all of the information that I've gathered from all of the other books that puts things in context. And I do those books to point out things that people are telling you is true when they're not true. Joseph Trento wrote a book, and he actually wrote the book from papers from 2 CIA officers. And it's very important to understand how they say things in a way that knowing Operation Gladio, and I have a kind of a funny thing. We have sunglasses made with Operation Gladio on the side of them, because once you wear your Gladio glasses and you look at things that are happening today and in the past, everything looks different. It's like that guy that does the glasses like that, and he sees something different. That's the meme of Operation Gladio. So at the Colonel's Corner, there's hundreds of hours. On my X account, you spell out Colonel at Colonel Towner, and there's no Watkins on there. There's a pin post that Bridget set up that has a box link that takes you out to a Google Drive. It has hundreds of other hours some of which are not on my Rumble channel, because what I did was an around the world tour. We started in South America, Latin America, at all the coups there. We went to Europe, we went to Africa, and then we went to Asia. And we talked about all of the countries that we have negatively affected and basically overthrown their governments, sometimes repeatedly. It's a fascinating tour. I learned so much doing that series. And then we went back to doing book reviews. We've done several that are out there. Also, I do lots of long threads, lots of research. She has the Thread Reader app. All you have to do is click on it, and it'll take you to every one of my long research threads there as well on X.
That's a lot, man. You stay busy. Clearly, you are dedicated to the cause, and I am so grateful for voices like yours. And I'm just upset that I wasn't more familiar with you before the last few weeks here. Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question before we part for the day.
Okay.
And I really hate to ask this question, but if you had to answer, you have to answer. This is not a fair question. I'm sorry. If you had to answer, in the larger scope, is America, are we good guys? Or are we bad guys?
The people are good guys. The government has been bad.
That's a great answer. Yeah. Okay. Bless you.
And I would
Thank you.
say that I would say that's true in most countries as well. But people need to understand, for those of us who's traveled internationally, our government puts us at risk, because I think back on it, when I was in Laos, the tour, I was there as part of the Air War College trip there, and we spent, like 4 days there going to the killing fields and like literally walking through history. We were responsible for that. I didn't know it at the time I was there. The people knew it. The people knew it. When I was in Cambodia, when I was in, I'm sorry, Cambodia is the killing fields. Laos, we were responsible for that too. But the same thing with Vietnam. Vietnam was us. And you listen to people and you get their feedback, but it takes one person who's had a family member that was murdered or assassinated by the CIA or in one of these events.
Right.
And you American citizens at risk because we don't even know our real history. I had a one call on my space months ago when I did Nicaragua. She sent the Nicaraguan session to her dad, who lived in Nicaragua while we were overthrowing that government, fighting the Sandinistas, who were not the bad guys, by the way, and they were not communists, that moved to Costa Rica to get out of the fighting. And he called her in tears after he watched our show, because he was now, for the first time in his life, hopeful that Americans were going to know what our government had done in our name. And that's the reason why I do what I do.
And it actually, listening to you go through this detailed history, it also, and you mentioning how much you have learned and gone to school over the years and not heard this history, it makes it clearer more than ever as to why our education system is completely dumbed down and prevents us from learning this stuff in our schools. Great question from Kara there. Is there a full book list that you reference somewhere? Is that available?
Stop it, Kara. So I have, this is a running joke. So I have a wonderful assistant, Bridget, who is also a woodworker. She built me this wonderful, beautiful bookcase that I have a picture of on my X feed. It's buried now. I'll repost it. If you actually ask AI like Grok to give you a list of the books on that shelf, it will. But I feel that the day I got it, that she shipped it to me, she lives in Missouri. The day she shipped it to me, it was completely full, and she had to start making me a shelf, which I have now about halfway filled as well. So no, I do not have a single book list, but I will tell you the top 3 books. The very first book is Operation Gladio by Paul Williams.
Boom, look at that. Right there on the screen.
Yes. The second book is NATO's Secret Army, who is at Major Sarge. God bless you. I love him so much. Yeah. And the second, but there's another one that is something about Operation Gladio, and it's Cottrell, Cottrell.
Okay.
Once you get those three books, and I'm sure if we stay here for another second, Major Sarge will find Cottrell's book as well, because he's just like that.
Right.
He is like my online right-hand man. And for those listening real quick, I'm sorry, it's Operation Gladio by Paul Williams and NATO's Secret Armies by Danielle Ganser. Go ahead there. I'm sorry. Ganser. Yeah, Danielle Ganser wrote that book as a PhD project, and he is in Europe. He has his own Peace Institute, and he gives speeches all over Europe. He is on X. You can find him at that name. And I highly suggest you follow him because the guy's totally amazing. He has a ton of videos. So let me find Cottrell's book real quick.
Okay. Yeah. And just to remind everyone, we're going to pick this up at the point of September 11th, 2001. The Colonel has agreed to do part 2 with us on Thursday, July 24th here at 3 p.m. Eastern. You got that in front of you there?
I do.
Okay.
It's a blue cover book. It says Gladio, NATO's dagger at the heart of Europe. Richard Cottrell. Now, the beauty about his book is he actually talks event by event, like all of the Gladio, like the assassination of Aldo Moro, the tube bombing in England, the train bombing in Spain. All of those were part of Operation Gladio. And he goes event by event. And yes, it's a fascinating book.
Holy crap. Nothing is as it seems, man.
No. That book is a very good book. Danielle Ganser's book is more of an academic book, but he's the one that discovered the secret document where you had to agree to have these programs in order to be as part of NATO. Because he did a scholastic academic project, he found things that even Paul Williams or Cottrell didn't know about.
Wow.
So those are the three top ones.
What did we start off saying? Everything you know is wrong.
Okay. So what I say is we live in a hologram.
Oh, yes, good. Yep. Okay. Well, Colonel Roxanne Towner Watkins, it has been an eye-opening day. Let's put it that way. And we will reconvene here on July 24th. I appreciate your time. Go check out her Rumble channel, Colonel's Corner. And of course, you do the X Space every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern?
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you for your time today, Colonel. I look forward to doing this again in about a month.
Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll try to find some animal videos to kind of bring the temperature of the room down. And I'm definitely, and this is going to be consumed. I'm sorry. That one's already been consumed. This is going to be consumed tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern when Rebecca and Brad join me for the Friday live stream. Okay, everybody, have a good evening, and we will reconvene here in 22 hours. Bye-bye.